Got it?
Cool. Okie dokie. I think we're now live, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to another, well, morning. I always say good morning because it's morning where I am, although it is now 12:01. So it's
Me too.
the afternoon in Spain. But here we are again with another Thursday webinar in the Hub. And today I'm joined by Dylan Gates. He's a teacher trainer, all-round ELT fantastic person based in Granada. And Dylan, you do a lot of work with business English, don't you?
I do, yeah. In the last few years, I've mainly been working with business English students in terms of teaching. Well, it's more sort of teaching, coaching, mentoring, a little bit of everything, really. But obviously, when you're working with individual learners, many of them prefer an unplugged approach because they come to you and say, oh, I have this meeting after this session. I need to practice it. Or, for example, this is happening at work. What do you think I should do?
So anything you'd previously planned goes out
Absolutely,
on the spot. Fantastic. So, I mean, today you're joining us to give us some ideas for speaking unplugged and doing more with less. So over to you.
Absolutely. So I've been a big fan of the unplugged or Dogme approach for about 10 years now. I realized I was doing it back in when I started teaching over 20 years ago, but we used to call it minimal prep lessons, I think was what we called it back then. But this whole idea of the three key principles, which are conversation driven or text driven, materials light, and focus on emergent language, I think it's a really effective approach, especially perhaps with adults, but I think you can also implement it with younger learners and teenagers, for example. So first of all, I have a question for you, T. So being good at speaking an L2 involves, first of all, accuracy. And what else do you think?
I'm imagining the key word here is fluency.
Oh, well done. I don't know how you got that.
Yay, points. Yeah, but I mean, as well, range, subject knowledge probably helps. And as well, I read an interesting quote the other day saying that, like, you know, talking about your hobbies, that doesn't make you a good English speaker. You know, that's kind of A1 level sort of thing. So range and level of getting better at speaking, perhaps. Have a range of topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I've just noted down a few sort of fluency, accuracy, range, complexity, and also perhaps simplicity. Some learners actually are very good at speaking in a complex way, but they use that in more informal situations where they should be speaking in a simpler way. Being cohesive and coherent, of course. Being an effective speaker, knowing how to transmit your message, I think, in an effective way. And confidence as well comes into it a lot as well. Staying calm when you're not quite sure what's being talked about, but still staying in the game, staying in the conversation. And I really became interested in speaking about sort of 15 years ago when I was working as a director of studies at a language school in central London. And some of us noticed that there were certain students who were very good at speaking English, or we thought they did well inside the classroom. And yet outside the classroom, when they were having their coffee break or when we had a social event, they weren't so good. And on the other hand, you had these people who were pretty weak in the classroom, and then you'd have a coffee or a beer with them outside the classroom, and suddenly you realize you've been speaking for about 25 minutes and they're fluent, interesting, and quite impressive. And why do you think that is? Any ideas?
I mean, I think there's definitely something that some students or some people just in a classroom environment, they get really shy. They feel like they're always being tested or always being observed when they're speaking. And so perhaps that's why they feel more freedom and more confidence outside of the classroom. And then on the flip side, perhaps you get people who actually prefer that really structured, right, this is what you're going to talk about, this is the language you're going to use, and they can do that really well, but then given more range, more freedom of topics, it's too much for them to cope with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's basically the conclusion I came up with as well. That, and I think one of what we realized back then was when I started observing the teachers, a lot of them were trying to help their students develop their speaking skills. And we had sort of conversation. We used to have 3-hour sessions, and the first hour, 45 minutes were basically called language analysis or something like that, language development. And they followed a course book mainly. They'd have a break and then they'd have a 1 hour, we used to call them conversation classes. But a lot of the teachers were using the PPP model in these conversation classes. And so what you've sort of mentioned there, that some people like control, other people like the freedom, kind of makes me think of the idea of target language, focusing on a specific element of language in the class, and emergent language, seeing what they can do and working with that. So I just wanted to look at a typical sort of PPP type speaking activity. So you have the presentation. It's all about the present perfect for life experiences. I have been to New York twice, but I haven't been to Bangkok, and so on. You do the presentation, you go into the control practice, and then you do a production. And generally, they're kind of mingling activities. You'll have a set of questions like, have you ever ridden a camel? Yes, I have. No, I haven't. And very quickly, it's, for me, there's a problem with this type of activity. What about you in terms of developing their sort of conversational speaking skills?
So one thing that I always love is when you kind of you do all this prep work. You present the language, you do some control practice, and then sometimes when you get to the production stage and you give them what you think is a task where they will need to use this language, and they just find other language to use, which works perfectly well.
Yeah.
Drawing on all their linguistic resources, which is great in real life, but when you're doing an assessment, you want them to be using that present perfect.
Exactly. And the other problem, I think, it's one, they avoid it. Two, they kind of are desperate to use it in every single part of the activity. So, have you ever ridden a camel? Yes, I have. Oh, when did you ride it? I have ridden it 4 years ago. And automatically they're trying to use it, but they use it incorrectly. So, but let's do this quick activity together. So if you can ask me that question, you can be the teacher, I'm the student.
Dylan, have you ever ridden a camel?
Yes, I have.
When?
Last year.
Where?
I went to one of the Canary Islands, and that's where I rode a camel.
How did it feel?
At first, it felt very strange, especially when the camel gets up from its hind legs. But after that, I actually felt quite attached. I developed quite a relationship with my camel, whose name was Brenda.
Oh, Brenda, that's awesome. Would you ride a camel again?
Yeah, absolutely. They smell a bit, but they're quite affable, I think, most of the time. Quite friendly.
And did you get the camel running, or was it kind of quite leisurely?
No, it was a very gentle sort of trot, I think. Yeah. Great. So the whole issue with this type of activity, it's that if there's a positive answer, yes, I have, then you move on to other language, don't you? You move on to other structures. And so then it's all about the emergent language, I think. And I think this brings me on to kind of what we feel about language and what we feel really helps our students develop their speaking skills in particular. I'm not talking about other aspects of learning the language, but being able to participate in a conversation comfortably, confidently, to express yourself clearly and effectively. And I think we have to reflect on our beliefs as teachers. So at least when it comes to helping them develop conversational speaking skills, do we think explicit teaching or implicit learning is more important here? Do we favor a teacher-centered approach where we decide everything, or do we think a learner-centered approach is more suitable? Target language, emergent language, accuracy, fluency, and form and meaning. And there's a sliding scale at the bottom, and I think we go from one end to the other depending on what we want to do with a particular activity or task or lesson. But generally, if I were to ask you, T, if you had to choose between one of those, each pair, which element would you choose?
Well, the minute the first one popped up, I was thinking a lot of that depends on what your students are like. Because if they're really good at noticing, you can do a lot of implicit learning. But if they've been brought up in an education system where they're spoon-fed a lot, then you need more explicit teaching. I quite like explicit teaching. I like that. This is what you do. This is how you use it. Go.
Right.
Definitely learner-centered. I would be kind of 50-50 target language, emergent language. I would like a bit of both. I'd go more for fluency, I think, and more towards meaning. But that's just because perhaps, I tend to have more general English conversation style classes rather than exam preparation or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So context is so important, I think. And as you said, the needs of the learners. But for a lot of us who are working, for example, with adults, or if we want to just help them develop their ability to interact and communicate and converse and speak in English, I think most of us would probably say we're kind of communicative approach style teachers. So on the screen now, this I thought was a very good explanation from the British Council Teaching English website. So the communicative approach is based on the idea that learning language successfully comes through having to communicate real meaning. When learners are involved in real communication, their natural strategies for language acquisition will be used, and this will allow them to learn to use the language. Classroom activities guided by the communicative approach are characterized by trying to produce meaningful and real communication at all levels. As a result, there may be more emphasis on skills, learning, reading, writing, speaking, listening than systems like grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. Lessons are more learner-centered, and there may be use of authentic materials. So obviously, some of us will only be able to, I think, adopt a communicative approach in part of our classes. So we might teach for 1 hour and 40 minutes, it's very much sort of target language, explicit teaching, but then we might have a 20-minute slot where we can be a bit freer and a bit more communicative. And when it comes to communication in the real world, we can say there are two types of talk. The fancy terms are phatic talk and transactional talk. Do you remember these phrases maybe from any training courses you've done?
I'm afraid
okay.
not.
Okay. Can you guess well, transactional talk, what do you think transactional talk is?
I'm guessing transactional talk is interacting with people, and I don't know really.
Yeah, it's basically interacting with people, speaking with people, but when you have a clear objective or you want to achieve an outcome or a goal. So in a negotiation, this is an example of a transactional speech event because you want to achieve something. Okay, if you want to maybe convince someone to do something, so you're a parent and you want to convince your child to do their homework or clean up their room, this could also be considered transactional. So there's a clear purpose, a clear outcome, a clear goal, objective. Phatic talk, it's what we did basically before we started this workshop or this webinar. Oh,
just kind of chat.
Chit chat, exactly. Yeah, small talk.
Because Rachel's posted social phatic.
Wow, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea. Building social relationships, maintaining them. Gossiping is an example of phatic talk, although maybe there's a transactional element because you want a specific piece of information about someone, possibly. can you think of any other examples of this sort of social bonding talk?
As in when and where it might happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I guess kind of like Zoom family chats.
Uh-huh.
You know, catching up with what's been happening. Probably as well, like when you go to a conference and you meet up with people and just have that, oh, so how's life? What you up to? Da, da, da. You know, you don't necessarily want to get anything out of it unless
it's catching up, exactly.
Working. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Even things like expressing sympathy, sharing anecdotes, these could all be examples of phatic talk. So I think if we really want to develop our student speaking skills so they feel comfortable in both sort of social situations, but also situations which require them to complete an objective through conversation, through talk, it does help that they're able to do both. So I feel that, you know, we should include these moments in our classes. And speaking of phatic talk, and I think we mentioned it earlier, a lot of the time when you observe teachers, when they're communicating with the learners, they ask lots of display questions. When perhaps for phatic communication, social bonding communication, you want referential questions. Going to put you on the spot again. Do you remember the difference?
Hopefully, because I did a talk about it last year. So display questions is where you know the answer, but you're kind of checking the student's understanding or the student's knowledge, whereas referential questions is much more, you know, what are your hobbies? I don't know that. Whereas is football a hobby?
Right.
Much more of a display question.
Yeah, that's a way to kill a conversation stone dead, isn't it? Yeah. So referential questions, like you said, you don't really know the answer. You're genuinely interested in what the student is about to say. So that also gives the student a voice. It gives them a bit of autonomy. It feels that they're able to invest more in the learning process, I think. So let's look at a very simple activity using these. Okay. Okay, so I love using dice. In the online classroom, you can also use dice, of course. So this could be just a very simple, well, exactly, yeah. All teachers, we never leave home without our dice or die. I can never remember which one. So it's a question generator. So can you choose a topic?
Let's go for food.
Food.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I will roll the dice. Number 2. So that's why. Okay. You live in Spain. So why do so many Spanish people think their food is the best in the world?
I don't know whether this is quite a Mediterranean thing, because I think it happens a lot with Greeks and Italians as well, perhaps. Yeah. And definitely as well, it's always their mum's cooking, which is the best. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay. And no offense to any Spanish people, but it's something I've noticed. And it's pretty good, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
If it's not the best, it's up there. It's up there.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And one thing I love, like slightly off topic, I love it when people invite me round to their house for like proper home cooked food, the stuff that you don't get in bars. That's a special day for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Over to you. Roll the dice and ask me a question.
Okay, 5. Where would you go for a special evening out for dinner?
Okay. So I live near Granada, and we recently discovered a Mexican restaurant, which I traveled for about 2 months in Mexico, and it's really authentic, great stuff. They know what they're doing. And it's really Mexican. So they've got all this Mexican memorabilia, and it's great. I love Mexico as a country, and I like spicy Mexican food. So that would be my recommendation.
Good tip for anyone living in or near Granada.
Great. So really simple, really simple. We're practicing questions. So there's a bit of target language there with WH questions. But there's lots of emergent language that could come up as well. And I love this particular exercise because we can change the question types. Can you think of any other types of questions you could use instead of WH ones?
I mean, things like when was the last time? I know the when is there, but I think sometimes when we say when, we tend to do it a bit simple, like when did you go, which is much of a long answer, but when was the last time encourages a bit more response.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, 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 yeah. Any others?
And I love would you rather. I think
Mm,
questions to get students thinking, especially if you do really random things.
right. So yeah, yeah. Preference. Would you rather? Which would you prefer? If you had to choose. So
Mhm,
great. Other things we could do modal questions, like should, could, would.
mhm. And
Um,
Lena's posted what if as well. It
great.
would be great for higher level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are loads of conditionals actually. You could, if you wanted to focus on target language, you could focus on the differences between certain conditional questions or indirect questions. Okay, really adaptable, really simple, really good fun. And in my experience, kind of any level of student likes this. I've also done it with business English students with interview questions, and that worked well. Okay, so that's an example of a very simple materials light, conversation driven, focus on emergent language activity. And I think it's all about this whole idea of interlanguage, that the black box, that the learner is creating their map of the new language and they're adjusting it. And we don't necessarily know what they know, which is one issue with target language, where you think they don't know the present perfect, but they all know how to use it. And so these kind of conversational speaking tasks or activities, they help us deal with emergent language. And also it's a great way to give them specific feedback. And it's this idea of the output input loop. So the students say something, they get a response, they get feedback. This becomes input. They readjust their message or they adjust their message. And just a little bit of theory. Lots of people know about the input hypothesis and Krashen, but the output hypothesis, which you mentioned right at the beginning, actually, you talked about noticing. Okay. Some students are very good at noticing aspects of language. So when they speak, they've got this monitor and they're noticing, I said that, but I know it doesn't sound right. So they can immediately ask us for feedback. They also think, okay, I think this is how to say it. Let's try. So they say something, and based on the feedback, they find out if it's kind of correct, really correct, or it needs a lot of work. And it really gets them thinking about, okay, the meta linguistic, which word should I have said that? I think I used the verb, but you can make it a noun, but I'm not sure how. So it all helps us deal with emergent language. Okay. It means that we have to be very reactive and responsive as teachers. But if the activities are fun, then that's part of our monitoring, as we're going around really helping them. And if they're doing this in pairs or small groups, we can move from group to group. And I think that the two main approaches with dealing with emergent language are Dogme and task-based learning. They're kind of similar, but do you think there's any difference, any fundamental difference between them?
I'm very tempted to say that at a very basic level, Dogme is kind of winging it, whereas task-based language teaching, you go in with much more of a plan in terms of what you expect the students to produce by the end of it.
Exactly. It's kind of more outcome focused, isn't it? I think. Whereas Dogme and Unplugged, well, you might have a very simple task, but it's not really important exactly how they do it in the end. The result isn't so important. What's important really is the journey, what they do while they're doing it. So, that depends on your particular objectives when you're doing a task or an activity or just planned a lesson or even having a conversation class. But I think it really helps even when we're doing these conversation tasks, to think about like inserting mini or micro tasks. So Jane Willis, a long time ago, they have this quite a simple, but I think a really useful categorization of types of tasks. So listing, ordering and sorting, comparing, problem solving, sharing personal experiences, and general creative tasks. So let's just try a little experiment. So I'm going to choose a topic this time. Let's stay with food. Chocolate. Okay. So I can start off with a conversation. We're going to start talking generally about, and then I'm going to insert a task, a micro task. So I imagine you're a fan of chocolate. You like eating chocolate.
Yes.
Yeah. Any preferences? White chocolate, dark chocolate, chocolate?
I like dark chocolate, and I like it with nuts.
Ah, yeah. Which type? Like peanuts or?
I would go peanuts, almonds, not hazelnuts, or maybe hazelnuts, not walnuts.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I mean, what are the main differences? Like walnuts and almonds, kind of similar, aren't they?
I would say no. I would say walnuts are perhaps slightly more bitter.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're not a fan of bitter nuts in with your chocolate?
Surprisingly, no, although I like dark chocolate. Um, yeah, yeah. I think I'm not a huge fan of walnuts just on their own anyway. I mean, obviously they're with the chocolate, but I don't like eating just plain walnuts.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love almonds. Almonds are great, and pistachio nuts, but not with chocolate.
No?
No,
What,
not
what
really.
chocolate would you go for?
I like dark chocolate with almonds or hazelnuts, actually. That's the classic. Actually, I have a question because a friend of mine is going to the UK. She's Spanish, but she's going to the UK. And I was telling her about how many chocolate bars we have. So if you had to recommend 3 chocolate bars that you can buy in the UK.
Ooh, okay, definitely go for a Curly Wurly. They used to be 12p when I was a kid, but I think they've shot up quite a lot over the
£12
years.
now, I think.
Probably. I would also go for probably a Boost. That's my kind of go-to chocolate bar. And then maybe something like a Kit Kat.
Okay. And if you
Like a
had
bit
to
of
choose
biscuit.
one,
Ooh, depends what I'm in the mood for, but probably I think Curly Wurly, caramel and chocolate, and it's cheap milk chocolate as well.
yeah, yeah.
Good.
And I just love the idea of a Spanish person going to a British newsagents or shop and asking for a curly whirly. It's just fantastic. It's just such a great word to say. Okay, so we've had a little conversation, but I've inserted a couple of small tasks in there. Which ones?
So we definitely had sharing personal experiences. There was the listing in terms of what sort of chocolates do you like. Then the ordering and sorting. Did a bit of we did all of them really.
Yeah, probably not a creative task, but if you were to invent a chocolate bar, what would it contain? So, but
Yeah.
as you can see, within the framework of a conversational lesson about a topic, chocolate, you can actually create these micro tasks. Now, you could plan them. I think more confident teachers maybe, I mean, this is what I do a lot of the time. I just insert them, quite naturally.
That's what I was thinking. Like, had obviously you've prepared this session, had you kind of planned, right, well, let's talk about chocolate and this is what I'm going to ask, or was this completely off the bat?
This was more or less off the bat, but I'd seen that list. So I had I think I subconsciously had an idea of which ones I was going to ask.
Awesome.
But I think you could start by planning that And then I think over time, you'd realize that actually you just get better at doing that automatically, I think, and finding these learning affordances and working with them.
And like Rachel's commented, these are, following kind of Bloom's taxonomy from lots to hops.
Exactly.
So involving that range of questions, of activities for our students as well is really good.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know the context that people are working in, but I think this can be used, and the Bloom's taxonomy is great there for making it. For example, if you're doing whether it's exam classes or ESP, English for specific purposes, certainly with business classes, you want to challenge them a little bit more. And I think it's also really important that we need to recycle a lot of these tasks and activities. This is all about doing more with less. So I saw it was a webinar, I think, with Scott Thornberry, where he talked about that. And can you think of any ways we can have a task and sort of modify it so we can repeat it again?
The typical kind of changing partners, but that really actually modify the task.
Well, but it modifies the partner, so different language will emerge, I think. So,
and I think as well, kind of changing the format. So if it's just kind of a conversation, but then turning it into a more formal interview. So again, you use the same content, but perhaps some of the structures will be slightly different if they're using more formal language or.
Right. So yeah, you work for the marketing department of Cadbury, is a chocolate company, and so you want to interview. Yeah, okay, you could make it more formal that way. Absolutely. Here are some of Scott's ideas. Different interlocutors, which you said, different time limit, different information, perhaps changing it from chocolate, doing the same task, chocolate, but changing it to chips or crisps, for example. Different mode, as opposed to speaking, you could like use chat to do it if you're working online. Different purpose. Okay, so that would probably be the closest to what you suggested there. Like, it's not just a general chit chat about chocolate, it's about you work for a marketing company.
And with that different mode, then making it into a questionnaire and what sort of questions would you ask people?
Absolutely.
Which would be very different as well to what you might ask in a conversation.
Exactly. And this is what I do when I have like so-called conversation classes. I try to actually add a couple of tasks in there just to vary things. But the conversation at the beginning, they're practicing basically, and they're sharing their ideas at the beginning, and then they're putting them in a more focused way with a task. Okay, so any questions at this point? Because I've sort of covered quite a lot of theory there. Hopefully not too much. I hope I've made it practical.
Yeah, no, I'm having a great time.
Okay, good.
Hungry. Question, like when he says with a different time limit, is the idea of that they repeat it in a quicker time so that they're more focused?
For example, yeah, there is it's Paul Nation, isn't it? He has this activity which is called 4-3-2. So basically to develop sort of presentation skills and when a student has to speak for an extended period of time. So they choose a topic and they speak for 4 minutes about that topic, which is a long time, and then they speak about the same topic with someone else for 3 minutes, and they're condensing all the time. They're becoming more efficient basically at saying that same information. And then they do it again with 2 minutes. Because when we practice something, we get more efficient, don't we? Generally, we get rid of a lot of the ums and the ahs and the fillers and the indecisive language based on the feedback we receive from our interlocutor as well. So that would be an example. Yeah. Okay, so in the second part now, we're just going to look at a few simple speaking activities or tasks that maybe we can use and adapt and recycle and repurpose. So that will cut down on your planning and use of materials as well. So you're probably familiar with this one, just a minute. Okay. If you're not British, you may not know it, but it's very simple. It's based on a radio show, which has been running for like 50 years in the UK. And someone has to speak for a minute about a topic, and then the other people on the radio show can interrupt if they think the speaker has repeated something, has hesitated, or is deviated, talked about something different. And they object. And if their objection is approved, then they have to continue speaking about the topic. So let's say person A speaks for 45 seconds, then starts to repeat themselves. There's an objection. The person who objected only has to speak for 15 seconds and they win the point. Okay, so really simple. How would you adapt that with learners, do you think? Because it's quite challenging, I think, for a lot of learners.
So I've played it a different way where when I first started doing it, the students were in pairs and one of them had kind of 10 tally points and they had to listen to their partner talking about a topic for 60 seconds. And every time they kind of went, or paused or repeated themselves, they lost a point. So the idea was see if they could get to the end of the minute and how many points they had left.
Wow. Okay, that's great. I will have to try that. That's really good.
So, I mean, it's, you know, it encourages them to listen to each other, but then there's not that kind of interruption of somebody else taking over, which I think is a nice adaptation, perhaps for higher level.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I find I've explained this the way it's done with the interruptions to business English learners, and they're like, yeah, this happens when I'm speaking in meetings. So they really see a genuine need for it here to be able to hold the floor. But yeah, your adaptation is fantastic. I love that. I will have to try that as well. Any other adaptations you can think of? Maybe with lower levels, would you have the 60-second limit?
No, I don't think I would. I think I would, if it was for lower levels, maybe for lower levels as well, I would give them preparation time first.
Yeah.
Because I think this is quite a fun game to put people on the spot and just get that fluency.
Yeah.
But certainly for lower levels, it could be a bit of a not the opposite of a boost to their confidence if
Absolutely.
they're on the spot and they can't repeat or hesitate.
Absolutely. So yeah, I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 60 seconds is too long, so you start with 20 seconds or 30 seconds, depending on their level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Rachel's got another really good question that I'll come back to.
Mm-hmm.
For this activity. She says, how about someone taking notes to give feedback later? So rather than them losing points as you're going through, the person listening is just, you know, jotting down, oh, you repeated yourself here, or
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Can we jump back to Rachel's question a second?
Absolutely, yeah.
Related to the increasing time pressure. So she says, Leo Sullivan proposes the 3-3-3 technique. This means students still repeat the monologue 3 times in the constant time condition, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. What do you think about this option?
I do something similar myself sometimes as well, just because people get better at doing it. It's skills training, isn't it? You do something once, well, it's okay. Can you do better? You do it again. It's usually, as long as there is genuine improvement, but I think on the whole, that will help, definitely. Mm-hmm. And again, you can make it very much about peer feedback. So they're all given their feedback to their peers, and also listening back yourself now with the technology, it's very easy to do that. So. Mm-hmm. So this really, I think, helps with fluency. Now, another sort of type of activity, which I think are really great, interviews. Okay. Now, as a business English coach, I spend a lot of time doing interview scenarios with my learners, but we do interviews all the time in general English with kids, with teenagers. What about you? What kind of interview type tasks or activities do you do?
I think those kind of that typical production stage tends to involve a question answer. Um, we say interviews and we automatically jump to kind of a business situation, but actually when you're just talking to someone, having a conversation, asking a question, getting an answer, that is an interview at its very basic level.
Absolutely. And it goes back to those referential questions where you want to find out something that you don't know from the other person. And people want to talk about what they're interested in a lot of the time. Okay, now we can challenge them. One thing I like to do, very simple activity, is celebrity interviews. So I ask the learners for homework to do some research on their favorite singer, actor, musician, whatever. Then in the next session, in the live session, half the class are interviewers, half the class are interviewees. Well, they put them in pairs and then they interview the celeb. And they don't have to know about the celeb because lots of interview questions are similar. So tell me about your childhood. So where did you go to university? What are your ambitions for the future? So it's a really easy way, I think, of helping them do a role play because they're speaking about someone else's life, and they kind of encourage them to do a bit of preparation for the session as well. Or make it a real play, which is what John Hughes talks about, how that really reduces the affective filter where they talk about themselves, I think. And the cognitive load, they don't have to put themselves into the mindset of someone else. They can just genuinely talk about their own lives. Liar, liar, it's an adaptation of the interview. Any idea what that would involve?
I'm guessing there's some sort of mistruth involved.
Exactly. So it's an interview role play, but they just have to lie about every answer. Mm-hmm. So again, it gets them being a bit creative. Maybe that works better with the role plays where they're playing someone else, but you could also do it where they talk about their own lives. Did you do your homework last night? Of course I did. Yes, I always do my homework. It's a lot of fun.
I think as well, though, what you were saying about the cognitive load, for some students, they struggle with that creative aspect of inventing facts. Yeah. Some people can do it really easily, but for other people, they really struggle. Or yeah.
Absolutely. So that's why preparation time, I think, might be, if you know these particular learners struggle, then give them preparation time where they can think of some lies to tell, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Negotiations as well. Again, it comes from the business English sector, but basically a negotiation is A wants something, B wants something different. So can you think of any kind of scenarios for other groups of learners where they have to negotiate?
Well, I watched a lesson yesterday for a PET exam where they have that kind of the situation, and there are 5 options. And I think maybe it's not necessarily that A and B want different things, but they know they have to fill the time. They have to keep discussing the options for 3 minutes. So yeah, they have to kind of not agree immediately.
Absolutely, yeah. So we can add a bit of a challenge to that, I think, where they're desperate to get what they want. So I just thought of some other scenarios. So parents and children about homework, romantic couples where to go tonight, husbands and wives, marriage contracts, teachers and students, code of conduct, employers and employees, landlords and tenants. We bring real life into these negotiations. Again, very simple to set up. Lots of really useful language emerges. You can also focus on target language, like using first conditionals. But if I do that, will you confirm that this other thing will happen? So again, negotiations are speaking activities which are quite simple to set up. From journalism, journalists have the 5 W's and 1 H approach framework. Do you know about that?
Well, I'm assuming it's, to get a full story, you need all of the details.
Yeah, and apparently it's one of my best friends is a journalist, and he said it's one of the first things you learn in the first paragraph of any news story. You've basically got to include most of this information. So um, again, really simple, great for storytelling and helping our learners. And again, it can be very collaborative. So we have a picture. So I'm going to ask you some questions about the picture. So first of all, what's happening?
I think they might be watching a concert, perhaps.
Ah, okay. And who are they?
They're a young couple from Prague.
Okay, okay. Um, she looks quite serious. Why does she have a serious expression on her face?
Um, I would imagine perhaps they're discussing whether to go and get a drink now or after the next band. They've got really good seats. And she's worried that if they go now, they're going to lose the seats. What do we do? I'm thirsty.
They look quite comfortable with each other, don't they? So when did they meet?
I would imagine they've been together for a few years.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps they met when they were studying at university. And this is a few years down the line, and they're on holiday somewhere together.
Right, right. And based on the picture, how do you think their relationship is going?
I think it's going well. Um, I mean, she does look serious at this moment, but I don't think, I imagine she's generally quite a happy-go-lucky person. And, the fact that they're traveling together, I don't feel that this is a trip that they've taken to try and rebuild their relationship. They're in a happy, stable relationship.
Right.
I'm an optimist.
So we've just done a bit of creative storytelling there. Okay. Now, this could also be the springboard for other tasks, couldn't it? They could write a story based on that conversation they had. You could have an interview role play. Lots of things we can do with that. So again, it's a very simple kind of way we can perhaps create a lesson almost out of nothing, just based on one picture. Yeah. My interpretation was completely different. I was convinced they were in the process of splitting up. And she was telling him she wants them to stay friends, and she values him and loves him, but not as in a relationship.
Oh, see, I think the physical contact, they look happy in that. I don't know. Maybe I need to zoom in on the picture a bit. I was just thinking as well, like Anne Robinson, a few years ago, I saw her speak at Athea, and she did an activity called 8-way thinking. And it was a similar thing of taking a picture and then thinking along the lines of multiple intelligences and nature and creating questions that way.
Wow.
So, what can they hear? Are there any trees where they are and things like that? So I think that's a really nice creative activity as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 So there are so many things we can do with the picture and storytelling. Organizing. So this is an activity I call the wedding planner, but it doesn't have to be a wedding, of course, but think an event, put learners in groups. So they discuss what needs to be done. They make a list of things that need to be done. Then they make a plan about how to do each task. Okay. So with young learners, for example, how could you adapt this to make it more of a relevant speaking activity for them?
I mean, even still just planning an event like a class end of term party or somebody's birthday party, that kind of idea of talking about food that they want to bring. And then if it was for a birthday party, discussing what presents would be good. Sylvina says Halloween coming soon, a Halloween party would be great as well.
Exactly, exactly. So again, pretty easy to create, I think, these type of speaking activities. And, you can blend them with writing as well if you wanted to. You could have a text to read from, but you could probably do it in a conversation class as well. The topic could be weddings or Halloween, and then you insert this task into it again. The elevator pitch again, something very common in business English. Are you aware of the elevator pitch? And okay, so the general idea is that you work for a company, and one day, you're in quite a low position, and one day you walk into the lift and you see the president of the company or the CEO, and he's in the elevator with you. So you figure you've got 60 seconds to introduce yourself, to make an impression, and maybe to tell him about this wonderful idea you have about developing the company or a product. So that's the idea. It's persuading, convincing. Okay. Again, works really well in business English. It's basically a mini presentation, and your goal is to convince the other person to take your idea seriously. Can you think of any other adaptations, any other scenarios, situations?
I mean, again, thinking about teenagers and discussing what film to watch. Like each person has their favorite film, and they have to try to persuade the others that that's the one they should watch that evening. Or again, buying a present. Like, I think we should get this because blah, 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 blah. My brain is just on the pet exam at the moment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I've done.
You could, with that second idea as well, you could have it that they have to convince somebody to make either a film of their life, and why am I so amazing? That I heard a teacher a while back do an activity where the students had to sell themselves, like as a way of kind of boosting confidence as well. They had like 10 minutes or 5 minutes to plan, and then they had to sell themselves as a person, not to someone. There was no decision at the end of who won, but just it was a really nice activity for teenagers as well. I think if they're in a safe environment where they feel comfortable, it's a real confidence booster.
Absolutely. And I think what Rachel said about the 3-3-3, you could also use that with this speed dating as well. You can have the speed dating elevator pitch where you convince the person next to you, and you convince several people that your idea or your job application is the best. Exactly. So again, very easy to set up.
And Sylvina's come up with a great idea. Learners have 60 seconds to convince the teacher that they shouldn't do an exam on a certain unit or topic.
Perfect. Exactly. Yeah. Or choosing a course book even. Yeah. Absolutely. Great. Okay. So they were the kind of just a selection of activities, but I hope the general idea is that these very common almost functions like persuading, presenting, negotiating, convincing, offering suggestions, storytelling as well. I think we can, with practice, and if we're prepared to work with emergent language, it's not so difficult necessarily to create these tasks, simple conversation-driven tasks, materials-like tasks that can really help you focus on emergent language. And it's such a great confidence booster, I think, for a lot of the learners where they do these speaking activities and they feel quite confident, and it helps with the phatic communication as well. Helps them, I think, build up their social skills as well, communicating in English. So just to finish, I've got a few general suggestions about speaking unplugged. So think about how we can reduce or manage the cognitive load of the task. I work, as I said, with business English students, so often they're quite comfortable with what for other people would be cognitively very difficult, complex tasks. So they're fine with that, but they struggle with the phatic, the social side of communicating often. If we can, how can we lower the affective filter And often that's through personalization. Most people are more comfortable speaking about something they know and they're interested in than something they're not. If they don't know about something that they have to speak about, giving them thinking time. Make them as learner-centered as possible. And rather than sort of like really focusing on the target language, anticipate the target language that might be used in a task so you can prepare that, but also expect the emergent language. And with feedback, I think it's really important not only to correct, but we need to feed in to give them reformulations of language, to extend what they already know, to give them new phrases, new expressions they can use. So it's all that part of, feeding forward. And then they can use it when we ask them to repeat a task or an activity, they can do that with the new language. Okay. So this general idea of if you repeat the task, that often results in better performance. And this idea, if you can really try to create micro tasks on the spot and insert them into these conversations, see how that works. I generally think most teachers are quite good at doing it. And the more experience you get at doing that and dealing with kind of reacting to the language the learners produce, the better you become at doing that. And I think that helps you relax as a teacher as well. And it helps you realize that you don't need to come into the class with loads of activities, loads of planning. You can often really respond to what emerges in the class. So any questions? Oh, that was my final Bruce Lee quote. Be water, my friend. Any questions?
No, I mean, the only question that came through the chat was Rachel's about the 3-3-3 approach technique. But yeah, I mean, I love getting involved in sessions. And yeah, I love speaking activities as well. And I think the ideas that you shared were just so easily adaptable to any age, level, class, topic. Like you say, it's finding those simple things that you can kind of have and think, all right, I can ask this question about this, or this is a way that I can make a problem solving question here. It's, with practice, with doing it a number of times, then it will become more fluent in a more fluent part of your teaching repertoire.
Absolutely. And I think people think of Unplugged as being not planning. We do plan, of course, when we give an Unplugged lesson, but a lot of that planning is in your head anyway. But also it's, you're not necessarily focusing so much on the target language. You're thinking, okay, so if this happens, what can I do? Or perhaps I can do this, and having options. That really helps.
We have had a question from Sylvina. She says, do you always use the Dogme approach all the time, Dylan, or do you also use course books for your business English classes?
Yeah, it depends. Some learners don't feel so comfortable with Dogme, so I try to start with Dogme moments. So, you 90% using the course book, using a plan, or using materials, and then you want to gradually over time expose them to a more sort of unplugged style of teaching.
Yeah, I think what we were saying before about, some learners are spoon-fed. Also, some learners like that physical takeaway. This is what I've done, or the kind of the empty worksheet that they complete during the lesson,
right?
Shows progress in their mind.
Yeah, I mean, I do most of my teaching now online, but I always make sure they finish every session with loads of notes in the chat box. So this is all the emergent language generally. And then they save that, they copy it, and I tell them, okay, now go home, look at that, whatever you do with my notes, but, make sure you record them. If it's new language, make some Quizlet flashcards or whatever it is. And I try to recycle them as well. So the next time we see each other, I say, okay, so tell me 5 things from the last session. See if you still remember them. So that's really important as well. So you have this sense of progress. But yeah, I mean, my personal preference now after years of teaching with adults, I love just going straight in there and so how's your day and seeing what happens.
Yeah, which I think is a great approach to have. I think one thing that kind of has worried me about a Dogme approach in the past is that you do tend to start the lesson with that. So how's your day been? And it's really easy for the conversation to be the same. So I think that's why I like to have a bit more of a plan. Like you say, it's kind of in your head.
And often I say to my business English learners, okay, so next time we'll talk about interviews. Okay, so there is some very basic plan there. We might be more specific. So let's focus on questions you might ask in an interview, or but then in terms of the specifics, I keep it very loose generally.
Nice. Awesome. I'm not going to be able to pronounce this word, I don't think, but Rachel says that Kandukuti calls Dogme moments dogmements, as in kind of meshing it together. Dogmements.
That's great. I'll have to use that, definitely. And nobody knows how to pronounce it. I think it's dogma, actually.
Yeah.
But I always say dogme or dogme.
Yeah. And I like saying Dogme. I did an activity on the Cert TESOL course where we had kind of different approaches, and they had two halves of an approach. So like lexical approach, grammar, translation, and then it was dog, me. You get a lot of
yeah, it does sound like a very unusual imperative, doesn't it? Dog me now. It sounds, I don't really want to think about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for today's session, Dylan. It was really fun. I know there's been a lot of engagement in the chat as well. And hopefully everybody's gone away with lots of great ideas for their speaking activities and just to pop into their lessons at any point.
Great. And if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me. So
awesome.
Great.
Have a great day, everyone. If you're watching on Catch Up and haven't already said a little hello, do feel free. Do feel free to tag me as well if you want any questions forwarded to Dylan. And have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day. And if you're in the UK, remember to buy a curly whirly.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.